Hello, my name is Rowlands. I'm a nutritional balancing practitioner, and in this video I'm going to talk about an important topic, often a controversial topic, but I feel like it's needed for healthy understanding, healthy discussion. I'm going to share with you my experiences on this topic and some information that I feel will be valuable and useful for you guys watching. I understand there's a lot of charge on this subject, so I'll try to be as careful as possible when I discuss it. But from my own direct experience and my own direct experience with other people, forgetting all the studies, you can find a study on everything these days. I think it's really important to have direct experience, because that's the only way that you can figure out the truth, in my opinion, as well as healthily looking at various different aspects in terms of people and studies, etc. So the topic is meat eating, and I personally feel that eating meat is very important for healing today. A really great doctor, Dr. Bernard Jensen, there's a good quote from him who says, "There is bad meat, but meat is not bad," and I agree with him on that. So when I speak to people about meat, and I speak to vegans and vegetarians, one of the main reasons why people feel that they don't want to eat meat is for very valid reasons, and I totally understand it, and I agree with it 110%, and that is the moral aspect of killing animals, and often it's about killing animals in a humane way. So the question is, if this is the only reason why people don't want to eat meat, then it's about trying to understand, trying to get more healthy and sacred ways of obtaining meat for health, because I do believe that eating meat is very important for our health. One interesting discussion that I try to explain to people is that, especially when people argue that actually vegetarian and vegan diet is better for you, is I am very much interested in indigenous people and indigenous ways, indigenous living. I personally believe that a civilization that lasted for over 100,000 years, and the only reason why it stopped was because of the Western civilization stopping it, is something that you really need to be looking into, because they seem to have got things right in terms of health, in terms of politics, in terms of sustainability, in terms of economics, and even in terms of development. I do believe that the indigenous people are highly developed people. You hear a lot of stories about the indigenous people and the Bushmen of the Kalahari, for example, who can talk to souls, who have said can be talked to souls. You read the creation myths of the Hopi tribe, for example, who said that they can get the feelings and experiences of God. You listen to even people from the modern day Aboriginals who have this intrinsic connection with nature, and say that they can speak to animals and kind of get into the animals' minds. There's the South Americans in the rainforest, when the guys went to them and says, "Well, how did you find ayahuasca? How did you find DMT? Because you have to mix a root with a plant, and it's it's basically an impossible combination." They said the plants talk to us. So in my opinion, the people that lived in this Garden of Eden were very highly developed people, and research shows that the vast majority of these indigenous tribal folk ate meat. And there's a lot of information out there where the indigenous and tribal people say that the meat is sacred, it's part of the circle of life, it's part of God's will. And what's interesting is they also say that they understand that they're taking a life and they're taking flesh, but they believe that the soul lives on. But they believe that it's really needed for health and development and happiness. And usually what you'll find is that God or the universe or the tribes will actually tune into some animals, tune into a pack of animals, and an animal that's ill or dying, old, or is injured for whatever reason, there will be kind of a soul contract whereby, because on Earth there is a give and take of physical flesh, of physical life force, the animal will give their flesh up for the development of another animal, whether it be a human, whether it be a lion, whether it be an elephant, etc., etc. And it begs the question, well, why, you know, if meat wasn't good for us, you know, these indigenous folks, for the majority of the time, had a choice. And you do find very, very rarely some vegan and vegetarian indigenous people, and actually when scientists did their research, they actually found out that these indigenous folks that were vegan and vegetarian were actually more unhealthy than the meat eaters. So I would say to anyone that just doesn't eat meat because of the factory farming, well, I would say, well, you know, the logical thing to do was is to go and eat more organically raised animals, and you go and check out the farm, or go and do your wild hunting. You know, for the vegans and vegetarians say that actually meat eating is bad for them, then are, you know, a great argument in my opinion, as well as many of the others that I'm going to be presenting soon. But I really like the indigenous kind of outlook of it, because I do believe that that was a great way of living, and it promoted health and happiness. They had a choice, and they knew intrinsically that meat was very vital for health, and it was very vital for the connection that they had with God. And yeah, and you know, they had a choice on whether to become vegan or vegetarian, and they didn't do that. You know, and they, in my opinion, had a very, very, very much more intimate connection and sacred connection with the earth and with the animals and with God. So I find that quite an interesting fact. What I also find interesting is that I'm actually friends with a lot of vegan and vegetarians, and I have a lot of clients that come to me from being vegan and vegetarian. And in general, I do find that they have very, very similar symptoms. Usually you'll find that their skin tends to be a little bit paler. They tend to have dark bags around their eyes sometimes, which is obviously a sign of malnutrition. They tend to be very, very overthinkers. Their energy tends to be spacey and airy. They will argue, you know, they'll tend to argue that they're becoming more spiritual, but in reality, it's more because they've got bad sugar imbalance, and that the energy is actually moving upwards and causing them to be quite spaced out. Other things, that they tend to be very cold, especially winter, but even in summer, which is an interesting thing. They all tend to have skin problems, spots and acne, a lot of them eczema, really dry skin, and that's due to some of the points that I'll make in this video. And also from my own experience, you know, when I first started to eat meat more often, I felt way more grounded. I felt way more happier in my brain. I started to develop certain esoteric abilities that I had never experienced before. My body temperature has increased dramatically to a point now where I'm way more warmer than all my friends and family are, just in general, which I find really interesting, and I do put that down to eating meat. My libido increased, my sex drive became stronger, my energy became more grounded, and there's a permeation that you give out to other people, which is really strong and beautiful. And in my clients, I know I have a lot of clients that are vegan and vegetarian. As soon as they started eating meat, they all say they feel much better. I've never actually had anyone come to me personally and say that they feel worse from eating meat. So that's some interesting experience from my own. I've not seen anything but good in direct experience with my own health, and with the health of my clients, and with the health of some of our friends. So that's interesting to know. You know, forget the studies, forget what scientists say. That is what I've experienced, and thousands of other people have experienced, and that is something to be noted. Whether you believe me or not is up to you. But I'm literally not gaining anything from lying about anything that I say in the YouTube channel. So, you know, moving on from, you know, my experience and kind of what I explain to vegan and vegetarians, we generally find that iron from meat is better absorbed than the vegetarian forms of iron. There's a type of iron called heme iron, and we find that it's very, very difficult to get unless you're having meat, for example. Niacin and other B-complex vitamins are found in meats and eggs. Obviously, they're also found in beans and yeast, for example. But, you know, an interesting fact was that there are some diseases, some B-complex vitamin diseases that weirdly enough cannot be overcome without adding meat and eggs into the diet. So, you know, you got a question now, why is that? Especially if you're eating beans and yeast, another non-meaty B-complex vitamins. It's like, you got to question the wholeness, the whole food of the B-complex that people are eating from meat. There's just something about that whole food. You know, it's a big problem I find today, and it's the reason why herbs are really good for healing. And you know, what you'll generally find is the human thinking is that they'll get a plant or they'll get meat, for example, and they'll try and take the active ingredient and just think that ingredient is all that's needed, when they don't realise that all the other ingredients in there work together as a system. You know, it's a little bit like taking out the engine of a car, saying, "Oh, this is, you know, we all need the engine because this is the main thing, this is the main power, the main catalyst." When in reality, you need the exhaust, you need the petrol, you need this, you need that, because they all work together. And it's a little bit like meat. You know, you could argue, well, just take the zinc out of the meat, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't work like that. And I think sometimes humans are a little bit egotistical and a bit hubris, thinking that that's what life and that's what nature's all about. When in reality, you know, it's important to come to realise that we live in this beautifully codependent reality where the complexity of the symbiosis between, you know, life force and you is something that sometimes you just can't really explain too well. And I think, you know, meat is actually one of them, in terms of, you know, why can't you just not supplement zinc and get the same effects than what you can if you eat the meat? And I think that's the answer. Bernard Jensen again spoke about the brain fats that meat has. Basically, the idea is that we don't live like apes do anymore. You know, we don't live just chilling out all day, just, you know, eating bananas and, you know, leaves or whatever. Is that we driving on motorways, we've got kids to pick up from school, we're running 3 businesses, we've got the car tyre to go and fix, we've got this going on, and meat is an amazing brain fuel that allows modern day humans to interact in the world with the energy that we need. There's great hypothesis of the reasons why humans become so advanced and developed, and it's because we started cooking our meats. We turned it into this amazing brain fat that not many people are aware of. And I think, you know, in my opinion, it's probably the sole reason why humans became so advanced. It was because they cooked the meat. They had a massive amounts of this brain fat and meat. Well, not only did they cook the meat, they ate meat, but cooking, I believe, creates this more potent fuel for the engine. So a little bit more about zinc. So even, you know, what we've generally found is that even when zinc is, because a lot of vegetarians and vegans do understand the importance of zinc, but generally what we find is when zinc is present in vegetarian foods, in vegetarians, but the vegetarian diet in general tends to promote copper toxicity, even if we can get zinc into the diet. And basically zinc and copper work together, and copper causes some crazy symptoms. Ironically, you know, it's very, very much related to the symptoms I talked about earlier. The coldness, the dry skin, the acne, the racing mind is all related to copper toxicity. And for whatever reason, it's that meat, the whole food of the meat that really manages to reduce and balance out that copper. So that's really interesting is that on a vegetarian diet, even vegetarian diets that are trying to incorporate zinc in terms of flaxseed or pumpkin seeds, or some vegetarians have cheese, for example, you still get that high copper, which is something to really think about. Why is that? What's the reason behind it? Do we need to rethink things about substituting certain minerals? Is it much more complex than that? I believe it is. So, yep, again, vegetarian foods are high in copper. These compete with grains, and soya, for example, have phytates in them which bind to zinc. So this is kind of the problem. Vegetarians and vegans that are not eating meat tend to eat more grains and soya. The phytates in the grains and soya will bind to zinc, so they'll make zinc not available, and they'll kind of push zinc out of the system, which is unfortunate because zinc is critical for feelings of groundedness, feelings of awareness, kind of pushing energy downwards, calming the mind. It's a really, really powerful mineral today. Another thing that meat tends to have is preformed vitamin A. So people with a low thyroid gland have difficulty converting B-carotene to vitamin A. They need a preformed vitamin A, and this is mainly found in animal products. Other things are alpha lipoic acid, which is a powerful antioxidant nutrient, mainly found in animal flesh as well. So an important thing to do, there's an argument of meat not being clean. So we find that we really need to cook the meat. I do believe it was part of our evolutionary path, is cooking the meat. This kills off bacteria and parasites and makes the body more yang. Vegetarians and vegans tend to be more yin, more coppery, more spacey, more airy, more ungrounded, more expanded. And in order to kind of reverse that, to kind of rebalance things, we need to do things more yang. So you'll notice the Nutritional Balancing program is much more yang. Root vegetables, meat, coffee enemas, the pushing down exercise, grounding, reflexology, all that kind of stuff. It's important to always take a digestive enzyme when you're eating meat. It's another argument by vegetarians is that they say that they cannot digest meat, which is interesting because it generally tends to digest better than nuts and beans and cheese and other proteins, for example. The reason why a lot of vegetarians and vegans struggle to digest meat is because their body is struggling and it's under stress and it's not got the digestive enzymes to process it properly. So we always recommend to take a digestive enzyme like GB3. Make sure you're chewing your food properly. Have simple combinations. Reduce liquids. Rest after you've eaten your food. Try eating less, for example. That's a common complaint. It's like, I don't want to eat meat because I feel too sluggish, or I feel down, I can't digest it. It's like, well, the reason why you can't digest it is because your body hasn't got the digestive enzymes to do it. It's cold, it's tired, it's coppery, it's airy, it's spaced out, it just can't do it. So it's not that meat's bad, it's that your body can't handle it properly. So what we need to do is we need to aid that process until things start working fine again. So I just want to talk a little bit about some good types of meat, because not all meat is good in our experience. So we find that lamb is a very, very good form of meat. Lambs tend to be well kept much better than other animals. They need fields, they need greenery, they need grass to really function and be well. They tend to be more organic. There's a reason why, in religious texts you hear things like the lamb, Jesus was the Lamb of God. The Jewish people celebrate the Paschal Lamb, for example. And you also need to be aware of other kind of tips in reality from religious texts. The reason why pork and ham is not recommended a lot of the time, and that's need to be aware of these things, because it's not a good meat. For example, pork or ham is full of trichina, It's full of other parasites. It's full of cysts, which is just not a, you know. It's interesting. What I'm trying to explain is that there's little hints inside religious texts for various things. Even shellfish, you know, just telling you to stay away from them, or like they'll promote other things like lamb, you know, and even beef. But unfortunately, beef is not that good these days. You know, chicken and turkey are good, so try and find organic. Like I said, beef, it's not that good today. It used to be good, you know. Is it the Muslims that, you know, with the sacred cow? It is a good food, but unfortunately, the cows these days, the beef, is crossbred and hybridized, and it's now becoming an irritant, which is unfortunate. You know, you don't generally get that with lamb, which is cool. Other, you know, good forms of food, and this is good for the people that don't really like to, you know, that they're not, you know, that don't eat meat just because of animal abuse, and I'm totally 100% for you on that. But wild game, wild deer, antelope, maybe you want to think about hunting your own food. I mean, how beautiful must that be? I mean, all these indigenous people who say that they need meat for development, and you know, there's a higher force at work, and it's part of the circle of life on earth is to give and take flesh, and they did it through hunting, and they had a very sacred connection with the animal. The animal gave itself often for its flesh, for the benefit and the development of the souls of the other animals and humans, which I find really beautiful. So why not try and recreate that yourself? Why not go hunting yourself, learn about how to hunt, learn about how to track, have this intimate connection with this life force that you just don't get the experience from anymore. I really think it's something that you should be doing. We do say avoid meat, try and avoid meat if you have cancer. Meat is high in iron, which is a problem for cancer patients, unfortunately. But it doesn't mean don't eat meat because you can get cancer. That's another argument, which I think can be totally debunked. You know, just look at the indigenous people. You know, just look at the Eskimos, for example, that eat meat pretty much for every single meal. You know, they don't get cancer. Cancer's much more complex than that. It's not just about eating meat. You know, don't go around gorging yourself on meat, for example. We only recommend eating red meat twice a week. But some animal protein every day is useful. Turkey, chicken, you know, sardines, etc., etc. So a lot of people say to me, well, I feel better on a vegan and vegetarian diet, you know. Why do I feel better? And usually what you'll find is that the reason why people feel better on a vegan and vegetarian diet are a few things. Often they've actually moved from a rubbish diet to a vegan and vegetarian diet, which is, you know, it generally eliminates a lot of junk food if you're on that diet, so you're going to feel a little bit better. And possibly allergens as well. They tend to eat with simpler food combinations, which can be really beneficial, especially for their digestion, because digestion's obviously weak, usually weak. What I've mentioned before is that they say that, you know, meat makes them feel low on energy, but in reality it's because they haven't got the digestive enzymes, they haven't got the energies to do so. So it's an easy argument for them to say, oh, meat makes me feel worse. But in reality, it's because they've often got a slow metabolism, a slow oxidation rate. So when they're having meat, it kind of slows down the system and makes them feel sluggish. And, you know, the vegetarian vegan diet tends to make a person feel yin, which is unhealthy today, because yin means expanded and upwards and spiritual and airy. And that can get confused with health, when in reality it's actually an unhealthy way of being, which is quite common in spiritual communities. And so they'll say, oh, I feel more spiritual, but in reality when you speak to them about the symptoms, you know, they've got, you know, dry skin, eczema, and, you know, cold and all that kind of stuff, which is not good. A lot of people say meat eating is related to violence. So, you know, Gandhi and Albert Einstein were vegetarians, for example, but also Hitler and Bin Laden. So there's not a very good argument for that, really. India is largely a vegetarian country, but it's had its fair share of wars, as we all know. America, for example, tending to eat less meat as time goes on. but they seem to be getting more violent. So the argument for meat eating and violence, in my opinion, doesn't have much weight to it. An interesting thing as well is that an Indian person living in America said that the people in India tended to have little drive and energy, a vegetarian company. He said that the people on the diets tended to become tired and quite listless, and you know, this might reduce violence because people have an inability to fight. That is not a peaceful diet. It's just a degree of, it's just a sign of burnout, you know. So, you know, again, attributing meat and violence is not a healthy way of looking at things. Like I said before, many vegetarians claim to feel more spiritual, but we found it's because mainly the diet promotes copper toxicity. Copper's a spiritual mineral, but when it gets too high, it gets out of balance. So a person becomes spacey and airy, and they have sugar imbalances, and it kind of masquerades as this kind of happy, peaceful being, when in reality it's this unhealthy yin, upwards moving energy, which is difficult sometimes to swallow. You know, I had a similar thing, and you know, when I started eating meat, I started grounding myself and started to become more clear and more grounded and more with the earth. You know, and then you can, you know, you're speaking to other vegans and vegetarians, and they just kind of, you can just see them, their eyes are open, and they, you know, looking around, and you can just tell that the head is just not really attached to the body or the earth, but they'll persist, saying that they feel more spiritual. I actually feel more spiritual now. I'm grounded, and I'm connected as well. So I've got this kind of dynamic between heaven and earth, which is super important. I'm not really trying to put down anyone in this video, by the way. The only reason why I do this video is not based on kind of scientific knowledge per se. It's just based really on direct experience. I mean, the feeling that I felt from eating meat, and the feeling that and the discussions I've had with other people that started eating meat from a vegan vegetarian background is astounding. I've actually not heard anyone really, well, not in my personal experience, I've not heard anyone give it a bad rap when they've started. I know, you know, I'm going through some common arguments here, but in my personal experience, I've not actually come across these arguments yet. So a few other people say that eating meat is a cause of world hunger. Generally, you'll actually find that governments that is trying to systematically starve their own people to maintain control is more of the reasons why this happens. Collective farming that is unproductive, poor food distribution, mismanagement and destruction of agricultural land, and ironically you'll find that in many places animal grazing is actually a really productive use of land. Some people say that meat eating increases cholesterol. So you know, talked about the Eskimos a little bit. The Eskimos eat more fat than anyone on the planet, and they have a cholesterol level of around 170 milligrams, which is well in range. The Maasai tribe, for example, they drink up to 7 litres of milk a day, and they also have low cholesterol. So, you know, at the end of the day, cholesterol is not about how much butter you put on your toast. Again, it's a very complex thing. In many ways, it's already been solved by the tribal and hunter-gatherer ways of living. And, you know, these days we come up with all these new faddy ideas on how to heal, when in reality, if you understand how people lived in the past with the modern day problems that we have now, that we need to kind of, you know, slightly unbalance ourselves, then actually healing becomes really simple, and much more understandable if you think like that more often. So a lot of people say, is meat safe? A lot of people talk about the hormones in meat, but often when anyone has said this to me, they tend to skip over the massive amounts of herbicides and pesticides on fruit and vegetables, which I find quite ironic. Yes, there are some hormones in animals, but you need to go and find organic food, organic animals, Go and wild hunt your animals. Just be conscientious. Go to the farms, ask questions. You know, as we become more pure and pure, and we're demanding more purer food and cleaner food, you know, farmers are having non-hormone free meats, etc., etc. So go out and do your own research, and go and shop properly and be that leader, be that person that buys properly and consumes properly, and that'll reverberate out into the world. There's something called vegetarianism and limitation. So people basically on a vegetarian diet will limit themselves, kind of put themselves into a box. And often this is actually an expression of guilt and shame. It's actually an effort to control and feel better about their lives because they don't feel like they're putting other people's lives and other animals' lives at risks. But in reality, what's happening is that they're actually feeling quite sick and ill and depressed themselves. And by feeling that they're contributing to the world by not eating meat makes them feel better on a mental level. Even though in the long run, they're actually feeling worse and worse and worse, which is a shame. Because in many ways, the intention in the heart's there, but sometimes it's a cover-up for them actually feeling bad about themselves. They're confused. They don't understand why. And this is why they'll have this overly liberal kind of way of thinking, which I personally find is an unhealthy way of thinking, because they don't really question things, in my opinion, with much logic. They're just trying to, you know, it's a bit of a flimsy way of going about the world, and you know, it's you know, they'll sugarcoat what they're doing with love and peace and harmony and utopia, but in reality it's actually causing more problems for themselves and more problems for other people out there. They're just not aware of it, which is a shame, and I don't really like talking about that. But that's kind of what happens when a person feels out of control in their own life. They try and control other things as a way of making them feel better about themselves, instead of facing the fear and the real issues, which is often really questioning things at a deeper level. I find that most people's arguments fall flat. I've never actually had anyone, in my opinion, argue why you shouldn't eat meat in a very logical fashion to me that makes sense. And I feel like sometimes it comes from this deeper aspect of a person's self where they just don't feel good about themselves, so they're trying to fix other things in the world that goes under the umbrella of, you know, caring and happiness and kindness, which obviously it clearly does, but in reality it's because they don't want to face their own problems, which is I don't really like saying that, but that's usually what happens a lot of the time. So, you know, vegetarian veganism is a very physically based concept. It's all about the physical level of the universe. It's about, I'm a human and I know what's best. And they don't think about the greater cosmos. They don't think about, you know, is it God's will? Why do indigenous people do it? You know, life forms are life forms at the end of the day. You know, it's all about physically based. It's not about the greater good, which is, you know, you can argue against that, of course, but the best thing to do is to kind of look at our ancestors, how they did it, and you can get some, you know, I personally believe they were way more caring than any of us are on this planet today, and they ate meat when they didn't need to, and they know that there's a sacred connection, a sacred soul contract on Earth. If Earth is all about creating a teaching platform, then maybe that's what it's all about. Maybe you've got a give and take, a life, and in reality, a physical fleshy life is fleeting. You know, if you believe in reincarnation, which I believe to be the truth, and it was, you know, every major religion talks about reincarnation apart from Christianity, but in reality it was in the old Christianity texts. Then, you know, that's a way of development, which I find really interesting. So anyway, hopefully I haven't triggered too many people with that video. I only want to express my own personal experiences, and I wanted to go through a few arguments that we get presented with. But honestly, I really hope you take that bit with a pinch of salt. and think about some of the aspects that I've talked about, because I've not yet actually seen today something more powerful in introducing meat into the diet for healing and development and happiness and health and groundedness. So that's something to really consider and think about. Alright, thanks for watching. If you want to get in touch, you want to start a nutritional balancing program, please send me an email, lewis@deephealingspace.com. Check us out on our website, www.deephealingspace.com. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Any questions, send me an email. Talk soon. Bye.